In large organizations, there is someone responsible for IP, and they work closely with the marketing department. And everyone understands the different aspects of not just building the brand, but protecting that brand.
Hello and welcome to the Brandtuned podcast, which discusses all things brand related, including the essential trademark and IP dimension. I'm your host, Shireen Smith, IP lawyer, brand manager, and author of Brandtuned, the new rules of branding, strategy, and intellectual property. Before the episode begins, I just want to mention the Brandtuned accreditation course, which is in the pipeline. It will cover how to create a brand strategy, taking account of intellectual property as it arises during the process. Brand protection considerations impact the choice of names or other brand identifiers. So to make better branding decisions, register your interest at brandtuned.com. The link is in the show notes. My guest today is Derrick of the Brand Strategy Insider blog. He is managing partner of the Blake Project and has had extensive and varied experience working in advertising agencies such as Saatchi & Saatchi. So he seems an excellent guest to let me know what actually goes on in these branding agencies. You know, how do they take account of intellectual property? This is what I want to get to the bottom of in this episode. Hello, Derrick. Welcome to the Brandtuned podcast again. So I've been aware that essentially people are not trained in intellectual property. So initially, when I came across designers who didn't know about intellectual property, I assumed that maybe when they worked in a big company, somebody else took care of intellectual property. They weren't aware of it. And then when they set up their own small business, they were having to learn for the first time. But then when you hear of cases like Tesco, that were engaged a big branding agency who, spent a lot of time and money and came up with a name like Clubcard, which was not capable of being trademarked. I just wonder what actually happens in larger agencies. Do they involve lawyers? How could this happen, for example?
Yeah, that's a real shock. Especially for practitioners who have worked with a lot of big brands. There was a disconnect somewhere, to say the least. But organizations, there is someone responsible for IP, and they work closely with the marketing department, and everyone understands the different aspects of not just building the brand, but protecting that brand. And I think you referenced in the case of Tesco there, it's an example of what happens when people stop communicating. So, and sometimes this just happens. Marketers, even their own, how they communicate with each other, breaks down internally. Having done brand culture work, I've seen this, and we can't stop talking to people. We have to continue to do that.
So where do people pick up their knowledge then, if they're not trained? Like I've noticed marketers aren't trained, various brand management courses where brand managers are the closest to the brand. So you'd think they would include IP for them. But courses I've looked at just don't include any IP. So how do people pick up the knowledge they need? Because you can't always have a lawyer there. You need to have enough knowledge to.
Well, you're absolutely right, Shireen. And I think, unfortunately, what we have here is siloed situations where there's IP people doing things and they're in the organization and marketers doing their things. And then at sometimes, key times, they're supposed to be collaborating. The attitude towards training, at least here in the U.S., it's very much a let's hire smart people that are also going to make sure that they continue to upskill or continue on their learning journey. That is not the best way to do things. You have to keep people, bring people together and educate them. Not just on the important topics, but also challenge assumptions in the room and help people understand that IP and brand management, they're really both living things. They evolve just like every industry, right? They evolve as time goes on, and everybody needs to be in that room, in that conversation, learning together, so they're all thinking about these topics in the same way.
I've actually wondered whether intellectual property has, needs to be rebranded in some way, because it's regarded as quite dull and boring by many marketers or branding people. And actually, when they learn more about how it applies, they're often very interested. But the idea of it is that it's going to be very dull and boring.
Well, yeah, it's unfortunate that it's taken on that personality over time, and perhaps it does need a rebrand, because what we're really seeing happen today, and even over the last few years, is the recognition that intangible assets are as much as 70% of a business's value. So when you understand that, then you should naturally see that intellectual property is what's driving that value. So marketers, designers, they all have to take this very seriously. It's not really an optional topic, but I do think there is an idea that I'm going to just bring an IP attorney into the picture when needed, or they're thinking in my business here, they're thinking about that, so I don't have to. I think there's that kind of mentality, but you really need to have the intellectual property experts in this early and often. So you don't run into the Tesco example that you mentioned.
Yeah, I'm really not sure what could be done about the fact that marketers are not trained in, for example, they often choose names. I'm not thinking that they should always go and get experts involved, but their whole approach to naming is to think about, describing what it is, because you want to attract people. So they say on the tin exactly what it is, which means that the name is not going to be sufficiently distinctive to qualify as a trademark. And that matters sometimes. But the problem is that they're often working for companies who also don't really understand IP. So it seems nobody really understands IP. Everyone agrees that it's terribly important. But when it comes to it, they tend not to include it because I don't know, this is what I'm trying to get to the bottom of. Is it too expensive to involve lawyers? Do they think that it can be left till afterwards? How, in your experience, how are projects managed? What does a branding and advertising agency do, for example, that might involve IP?
I think they, when you look at it, kind of both sides, one is, the function in a larger organization, and then, an ad agency that is, then working with a client that may not be big enough to have their own IP team in house. You think about the first thing is the creative partner is thinking about how do I develop the best name, and they go through their process. And I think the mentality is that we figure out what's the most advantageous path, and then we get an IP attorney in here to to make sure this is stands up to their criteria. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I think it's just a kind of a creativity first mentality, and then let's hope that the IP attorneys see it our way. And I think it's a dangerous path to do that. You really need to fold them into the process so their criteria and the marketing criteria are together. And in my experience, I have not seen that happen.
Bringing the two together?
Yeah, early. Bringing the two together early. Yeah, it could be expensive. Plus, I would say there is an idea that IP attorneys are going to stifle the creativity, and creativity needs to start with no guardrails. It needs to just be out there so we can kind of see, imagine all possibilities, mm-hmm. and then put that the lens of reality on top of it. And with these projects, it's usually naming, right? Naming, which is the first story we tell about ourselves. So naming that process, it can include hundreds of naming candidates. It has to be memorable, defendable, .comable, succinct. All of these things have to come together in naming. But I think, it just is not going to, if it's not protectable, what do you have? What do you have? That's something that you have to really ask yourself that. And the answer is not much, because if it's something really good, it won't be long before that's copied by someone else, or you're out in the marketplace, as you mentioned, with something that's not distinctive. And the job of that name is to help you separate from your competitors. So you're out in the marketplace with something much weaker than what you could have had.
Mm. In your experience, what happens to choose things like colors and symbols, because they also impact IP and whether they're distinctive? For example, if you choose an industry color as your brand color, you're never going to be able to trademark that. I've got a case in my book where Cheerios, they tried to apply for yellow to be trademarked, having used it 45 years. Now, the thing is, nobody seems to have realized that actually it's not going to be distinctive, because it's rather like describing with a word. It's the same. So distinctiveness applies across the board to all sorts of different aspects of branding. So how do designers and people choose colors? And do they think about IP? Do they try to be different to others?
Well, they definitely try to be different to others. I mean, part of the exercise is to mapping out the competitive set and putting all of those brand identities side by side, and looking for a space that you can own there.
So they're doing that visually, are they?
Yeah, visually. Yeah. Yep. They're doing that visually. So, I mean, in best practice, you're doing that visually. I mean, others could be doing this, isolated from what others are doing in the market, which I don't think is a good idea. But when you think about colors and you think about all of these elements coming together, at the end of the day, brands are owned in the mind, right? So with Cheerios, I mean, that association with yellow is going to work for Cheerios, even though they could not protect that in a legal way.
But the downside of not being able to protect it is that competitors are a big problem all the time, can mimic the brand and also use the same coloring in a way that would be difficult for them to do if Cheerios managed to have a trademark, over its color.
You're right, Shireen, but the interesting thing is the more a competitor makes themselves look like Cheerios, the more I'm apt to think of Cheerios when I see them. So the closer they get to a big established brand like that, even if it's right up to the edge of legal action, consumers know, and it triggers them. Depending on how close they get, to think about Cheerios, and that helps your competitor. You're reinforcing, the good things you like about Cheerios. And yellow is one of those things, one of those brand assets that Cheerios has carved out as something that's valuable to them and helps communicate who they are.
Well, I would say they haven't got an asset because they can't own it. You see, with identifiers, they need to be both unique and famous to you. Color is very difficult, but something like the bottle, Coca-Cola bottle, if they hadn't taken various actions to make sure that it would be unique to them before it became famous, associated with their brand, then they wouldn't have been able to stop competitors using similar shaped bottles. So it's absolutely key to stop other people, especially competitors, using what you're using. So with music, you can stop it because you've got copyright. With the bottle, they registered the design while they were building fame. Color is very difficult to do anything about, which is why I would argue it should be just one of the brand elements rather than the main one. Often people just use a very simple stylized font and a color, and that's all the brand has by which to be recognized. There are no symbols, nothing,
Yeah, I do agree with you there. It sometimes is, it's discouraging when you see people introduce things in the marketplace and it looks, at least from a professional, that they've given no thought to it. They do not realize the power of an identity. And they see that as something that is just, we just need a name and a logo and we're just going to throw it out in the market. And if, every customer touch point matters, especially a name and a logo. But back to your Coca-Cola example, I think if, for those listeners that have a brand or, thinking about starting a brand, I like this Coca-Cola example, that bottle. Because ultimately what you want to do is what Coke has done with that bottle, and that's smash your brand. So this concept is, if you can visualize smashing that Coke bottle on the ground, any piece you pick up of that bottle is going to be unmistakably a Coke bottle. It doesn't even have to be the piece that has a piece of the logo on it. Everybody knows that shape. And that's happened over time. Right? Over time, they understand that shape, which is another reason why it's so defendable. So that's what you want in a brand, right? You want to be able to smash your own logo and think about someone picking up a piece and saying, this is that brand. So all of the elements matter in this sense, right? All of them.
But if they hadn't protected their intellectual property, they wouldn't be in that position. it was actually because they were being copied so much that they decided that this designation of origin, which the bottle would be, should be totally unique, and illiterates would be able to tell it was theirs by the feel of it and so on. But they had to protect it very carefully. So IP is very much interrelated to, people look at the end result and they think that somehow people magically get there, but you have to take action with IP to be able to reach the stage where Coca-Cola has reached. I'm a bit interested in branding because often people are choosing very plain logos. Have you heard of branding as a concept?
Oh, yes, I have heard of that, and it is. I think part of it, and unless you've heard, maybe you've heard a different definition, but part of it is just being the dull option in a world of shiny options, right? So it's a way of. It's a strategy around, distinguishing yourself from others.
By being simple? Very simple.
Yes. So it is important, I think, today when we're in an over-communicated society and we all understand we're either a signal or we're a noise, that simplification, radical simplification, is a wonderful strategy because it makes things really easy. It reduces friction, and people can hear or see that signal rather. So yeah, I've heard of that branding, but one thing to think about here is kind of the governing rule is you're going back to differentiating yourself, right? You're always coming back to that. So if everyone has a color logo, you have the black and white one. You're always coming back to don't lose sight of the goal. It isn't just to be bland. It's to be different. And I think you may be leading up to a point where when you try that, it's harder to protect what you've created.
You can protect a simple logo easily enough. It's effectively like a word mark. But my concern is that now that Ehrenberg Bass Institute have highlighted the importance of distinctiveness and using codes, you actually haven't got very many codes if all you've got is a logo and a color. How else are people going to recognize that it's you? So I just wonder why more symbols aren't used, maybe alligators or animals. There's just so much that could be done and it's just not used.
Yeah, I think I think what we see in the design world, in just my own observation, is there have been, I would say, different waves of great design when it comes to identity. The times of Paul Rand, who was a famous designer and did many large global brands here in the U.S. And then that work has somehow gotten into a place where it's not thought of as well as maybe it was in the past. I don't know why that's happening, but you bring up a great point. I don't know if the designers that focus on brand identity are. I don't know why they're moving away from what people did in the past that was very, very effective. So I know I'm really generalizing here, which is, not always the best thing to do, but it's great to I think to think back on people like Paul Rand and what they did in the past. And how they differentiated brands through intricate designs and that had lots of different elements that were distinct to them. this oversimplification is you can go too far on the oversimplification as well. So I think what we're seeing in this push for simplification is probably some of that, people taking it too far to a place where it's really not going to work for them as much as it would otherwise.
Yeah, I came across a case study on a course I was on, where Staples, Office World, and Office Depot were the three brands left standing in their space of stationery and things. Mm-hmm. And they were all using red logos, and they just had a simple logo. And the thing is, people began to confuse them so that they would go into one shop, purchase things, and then give a discount card belonging to a competitor, thinking that they were actually there. So they'd go to Staples and hand their Office World discount card. That these brands had become so confused with one another, even though they had different names. Mm-hmm. But I think that's one example of why it would help to have more visual elements to distinguish one brand from another, especially if you notice that competitors are copying you. If you start with red and everyone else also starts using red, I mean, would you make some adjustments? Do you watch what other people are doing once you've set your branding?
Well, you certainly do. That is one of the things that anybody that is, I would say, even not a savvy marketer should be doing, is thinking about what their competition's doing. But the fight will always be for the customer, not with the competitor. But when you step back and you look at what others are doing, there's an opportunity to learn about yourself, and there's an opportunity to learn about them. If you're starting to blend into just the scenery of the space, then I think that's you mentioned the loyalty card and maybe a Staples, and they brought another, an Office Depot card. That's a real signal that you need to be thinking about, pulling away, trying new things. That's really, really important. And I mentioned this a little while ago, but brands are living things. They're not a pond, they're a river. And you have to keep moving with that. And that's really the paradox of branding. You have to change to stay relevant.
And what's your view of totally changing colors? And because in my experience in the small business market, often people come out with totally new brands. So they were one color and then they have a refresh, but it actually ends up being a totally new logo, totally new color, so that they look different. And, the memory that their customers have of them is obviously going to be impacted. What do you think about refreshing a brand in that way?
Well, if there is a good reason to do it, because every change like that is a signal to the marketplace, right? It's a signal to your employees. We're doing something new. And the only time you should be doing that, or one of the only times, is that you actually have something of value to your, to those most important to your future, and you want to signal to them that something's now part of you that really, really matters. And this change is one way that you want people to take a look and either reconsider you or understand this new value. What sometimes happens is you'll get a new marketer in place, and they'll have a well-established brand that has been, and I've seen this in cases, untouched for 40 years. No reason in the world to change it or do anything with it. But because they're new and they have to prove their own value, they feel that they have to put their fingerprints on something. and make a change that's unnecessary. But I think back to the root of your question, you have to really understand the equity you have in that brand before you go changing things. And what are the real reasons why you're changing? Now, if there's a real radical departure from what you were in the beginning, there needs to be a really, really good reason for that. And it really needs to mean something to your customers and employees. That's really the bottom line. I mean, there are times when you've got to think about change, and maybe it looks like, you're not with the people of today and you need to make an adjustment. Maybe there's something that's gone on with your organization that has it may have even been illegal, and you need to signal to the market that you're changing your ways. The leadership has changed. You're changing. Mm-hmm. So it's all about. I think this work is all about connecting with your target customers and your employees, and bringing them closer. So if you've started to move further away, then that would, and that's something that you can prove, and then you would want to look at this.
What did you used to do when you worked in places like Saatchi & Saatchi? What sort of roles did you have?
Yeah, so I worked in a couple of agencies before starting a brand consultancy in 2003. At Saatchi & Saatchi in particular, I was working in business development. So that was pitching global brands and helping them understand our value. I was also involved with strategy there. So it was a dual role. But before that, I had also been working with on strategy work, and even in my career, I've gotten into some of the creative work, mainly copywriting and as writing taglines and jingles and those kinds of things, and that was maybe an early passion of mine, but that moved to strategy work later on in my career, and then, as I said, 2003, I really began focusing on brand strategy, with over 200 brands now in all stages of development. But this is I think this is an important conversation, what you started here, Shireen, because if we're going to go out into the marketplace and we intend to create something valuable, then we need to be focused on protecting that. And we need to make sure that we have IP attorney involved in that. So we're going to get out there and we can make a difference, but also make sure that we have something to fall back on if we have some kind of competitive threat or copycat, right? I mean, how are we going to protect this rather?
Yeah, I think actually it's important to have some training initially, because then people know when to involve an attorney, because you need to have enough understanding to be able to operate without having to have an attorney, but have access to someone to know when to ask questions, to know what you don't know, I guess.
Yeah, right. Shireen, I think I'm, you and I are a lot closer to this than, I'd say a lot of people that we know in our circles. So one of the things that we do is brand licensing. And, that's a conversation where we don't have IP attorneys on staff, but it's very clear to everybody in licensing, these are assets that have been protected and now they're being licensed. And that is a conversation intellectual property is embedded in the conversation. There is no way to have a conversation about licensing without starting with, well, do you own the trademarks on this, or, do you own the rights to this? Right. So I think this same mentality needs to happen in other parts of building a brand, right? Yeah. The same kind of conversation has to happen. And it's just a fact of the matter that the conversations don't begin that way. And it really takes time before someone goes, wait a second, and raises their hand. We need to make sure there's an IP attorney that's taken a look at this.
How did you tackle taglines? Was it important to you to have them be protectable, or were you really looking for something that communicated what the business did? I mean, like Just Do It is definitely protectable because it's not describing anything. But what were you trying to do when you chose taglines?
Well, when you say that something is an asset, and a tagline is a brand asset, you're basically saying this is something of value. And the attitude there, and even not just attitude, but professional opinion is that you're going to protect that. So there would definitely be a search to see if that existed out there. And typically an IP attorney would do that search. So you could do like a soft search on the internet and see if it was .com by somebody or something, but that is no different than any other asset that you want to own.
You would care, therefore, that it should be protectable.
Yeah, definitely. Especially if you've taglines, you can come up with something very unique and very powerful for a client. And you want to make sure that they can own that. And, you don't want to lose that to somebody else. There was actually, earlier in my career, there was a tagline that I wrote for a watch brand, and it was Own the Moment. And it was kind of a play on this action because the watch brand was an action-based brand. Navy SEALs wear the watch and all kinds of things. So, and that was something I presented to the client. And they took 6, 7, 8 weeks before they said they wanted it. By that time, Bauer, which is a big manufacturer of hockey equipment, they had someone there thought of it too, and they had already taken it.
Yeah, this so often with names. Well,
yeah, right. So I mean, you have to move on it, but you've got to be. I think this work, when we talk about intellectual property, it really separates the serious from the curious. Right. The curious are interested in, I may want to protect something. It sounds like a good idea to protect things that are part of me. But it's more talk than anything. And the serious go, I'm securing that now. I'm going to make sure that doesn't get away from me. So, and that happens in various points of building a brand. Unfortunately, the discipline of building brands is different than other parts of a business. You wouldn't think twice, about making sure that things were taken care of in other parts of the business, but marketing it somehow. It's fuzzy for people, or they think it's interpreted differently, and people put weight on several different things, weight of importance on several different things. So it's not this process that is uniform everywhere you go. Unfortunately, as a matter of fact, just to share, one of the things that we do, Shireen, at the Blake Project is brand education. And there are times when we'll have people from Nestle and Coca-Cola that are now working together in the same company, and they learned about building brands in different ways. And you have to start with brand education and bring them together. So it's just very fragmented across the board. So we have to have a common ground to start from in how we're thinking about brands and how we're thinking about how we're going to protect them and how we're going to build them.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to have a budget right up front for legal protection. And, I've often wondered whether it's too inconvenient for designers or branding agencies to say, well, actually, you need probably X amount to also protect this, because there's no point us creating a distinctive brand if you don't at the same time protect it straight away, because, the name could be taken by someone else, the tagline could be taken.
Yeah. And it's a sign of a poor design company or agency if they bring something to a client and say, you have to consider today what you choose needs to be protected and a search needs to get underway. If that isn't part of the conversation, then it could be a client that really needs that guidance, that there's a sense of urgency around it, and this is a really important part of the conversation. But it happens. So I would really like to understand what was going on inside of Tesco for that to happen.
I suspect they just fell in love with the name. That often happens, that people get very attached to something and then, they just want it. So the whole process, I suspect, led them to want Clubcard before they even checked availability. Maybe somebody senior really liked it. I don't know. I'd love to know as well.
Yeah, maybe you're sometimes the IP folks and the marketing folks are overruled, and that could have happened there, where the senior leadership team decided that.
Well, IP is often left quite late. So usually they've made decisions, they've created the brand, and then they'll turn to the IP department and say, register this trademark, as if basically whatever we've chosen can be protected. That's the attitude. And that's, I think, one of the things that you're trying to change in the world with your book and your podcast. It's that awareness that this is a critical part of the journey in building a brand. So thank you very much for coming to discuss this topic with me, Derrick. I very much appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks for having me back, Shireen. Always a pleasure.
Yes. So how can people get in touch with you?
Well, there's kind of two ways. One, we publish a popular, I would say, resource on brand management called brandingstrategyinsider.com, which has been out there for 15 years and with, I think, over 50,000 subscribers now. And so that's one way you could find your way to me. There's thousands of thought pieces there written by many people, including you, Shireen. And then also the BlakeProject.com. That is the URL of my brand consultancy. So either way, I'd be happy to hear from your listeners.
Sure. We'll put that in the show notes. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bye. That's it for this week. Do subscribe to the brandtuned newsletter to get weekly updates. I'd also love to get your feedback. Just send me an email to info@brandtuned.com. Finally, if you liked the episode, please do share it with your friends and colleagues and review it on iTunes or whichever platform you use to listen to podcasts. If you leave us a 5-star review, it means more people will listen and we can spread the word much more quickly about the podcast. Thank you and bye for now.